should be. Horror films. The cinematic genre that searches for our deepest, darkest fears and then throws them up on the big screen to both terrify and thrill audiences everywhere. They are the movies that we have nightmares about, and they are the reason we check under our beds and in our closets at night. They are the films that stick in our heads and are responsible for more than just a few sleepless nights. But once you get past the fear and the gore and the bone-chilling suspense, you start to wonder, what's going on behind the fear-inducing exterior? If we investigate deeper, we can take a critical look at how gender is enacted in these oh-so-thrilling attractions. And that, my friends, is our goal today. We want to train a critical eye on what's going on in these films and analyze the place women fill in this genre that has exploded from its place as a cult attraction in the 60s and early 70s to the mainstream entertainment it has become today. We hope to first take a look at horror film's roots in what we can call old Hollywood horror, and the original horror master himself, Hitchcock. The man who put on screen beautiful, always blonde leading ladies, destined to end up dead, or worse, desperately needing a brave man to come to their rescue. We will take a look at the common critical ratings of typical horror movie content, with a focus on active versus passive character roles and victimization. As well, we will investigate the much contested theory of the final girl in horror films. Alfred Hitchcock, an example of old Hollywood horror. Alfred Hitchcock was famous for his films of suspense and horror, particularly the movie Psycho. When we think about Psycho, we are reminded of the shower scene where Marion is savagely killed in the bathroom of a secluded motel. The scene, one of Hitchcock's most famous, is notorious for being one of the first movies displaying a woman in her underwear and bearing flesh. Of women in peril or damsels in distress, which were common to the early days of film, were often central in many of Hitchcock's movies. To Hitchcock, the vulnerability of women was a strong dramatic device that he saw as a tool for him to utilize in creating his films. A particularly graphic example of this capitalization on the stereotype of the helpless woman can be seen in his film The Birds. In The Birds, the character Melanie is trapped in an attic while being attacked by hundreds of birds. Bleeding and hurt, she tries to open the door, but gives up. Yes, only the brave and charming Mitch, her leading man, can overcome the obstacles and save her from certain death. While it would have been easy for Melanie to open the door and run free from the assailing birds, this was not the avenue chosen for this scene. In these types of films, it became the mission of the leading man to be the rescuer, while the contrasting roles for women were to merely look pretty and give the male character an opportunity to showcase their strength and bravery. It is no secret that Hitchcock was a tyrant with his actresses. Not only did he make them suffer on the big screen, but he was also torturing them on set, pushing them to their limits and abusing them verbally. Many actors were only willing to work for Hitchcock because everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. And what's more, all his leading ladies also had one thing in common. They were thieves, liars, and/or traitors. As we can see, the genre of horror films did not start off on a very encouraging note when it came to its portrayal of women. And what about today? Contemporary horror. Many critical interpretations of how gender is performed in horror films focus on the notable difference between the active and passive roles male and female characters play. Laura Mulvey, feminist film theorist from the University of London, suggests that audience members identify with the characters of their own gender in horror movies, and that in doing so, males and females receive two very different images with which to identify. Traditionally in horror films, the images females are presented with are that of passive, terrified women, whereas the typical images presented to male viewers is that of the active male protagonist who works to further advance the plot of the film. It is this portrayal of women as helpless victims that is one of the reasons horror films have developed such a bad reputation for being anti-women.
Here's Johnny!
This stereotype can be seen in character behavior. Typical horror films display female characters in a state of terror, often screaming, begging, or crying more frequently than their male co-stars. The male characters in these films are much less likely to exhibit these signs of fear and are more often depicted as expressing anger. Research by Barry Sapolsky and Fred Molitor support this by finding that on average, female characters are shown in fear for more than 2.5 times longer than male characters. However, there is some evidence that suggests this uneven display of gender-related fear has seen a decrease over time. So perhaps this is a sign that we are making progress in balancing gender representations, at least in the vein of terror-stricken women. Victimization is another common topic of criticism when it comes to female representations in horror films. The common understanding is that females make up a greater proportion of victims in these films. However, the research done by Sapolsky and Molitor found that, in fact, these films feature males more often as victims of violent acts. However, there is a qualitative difference in the torture and death scenes of female and male characters. They differ in both length and detail. While male characters' death scenes usually last approximately 2 minutes or less, the death scenes of female characters are recorded to last an average of 10 minutes. As well, Jody Kaesner of the University of Nebraska notes that the details that each gender's death or torture scene is granted is also unequal. Female deaths in horror films are seen to focus to a far greater extent on mutilation than their male co-stars. You'd think that the men in these films would start to get jealous of their female counterparts for hogging all the dramatic screen time. Additionally, female deaths are often insinuated as forms of punishment. As Kaesner mentions, sexuality is typically what is punished in this genre. Those who engage in recreational sexual behavior, particularly females who do, often meet their grisly end in these films. Obviously, if there's a deranged killer roaming around, it's best to be a virgin. As with any critical analysis, however, there are exceptions. This active male, passive female concept has been reversed in some films, a notable example of which is Alien. In this film, the active character that defeats the monster and outlives all, including all the men, is female. This provides us with an example of a concept that calls into question many typical criticisms of women's portrayal in horror films, the final girl theory.
This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
Who is the final girl? Female empowerment in horror. The term final girl is a phrase coined by Carol Clover in her book Men, Women, and Chainsaws. It describes the female character in horror films that survives the longest and usually escapes the main tormentor in the end. This idea of empowerment has been further argued by Isabel Cristina Pinedo of Hunter College of the City University of New York. She argues that by attempting to overcome their assailants, final girls change women's roles in relation to violence from passive to active. In this view, the final girl may be victimized, but this in itself does not make her a victim, as she takes an active role in defending herself and fighting for survival. Clover notes that in most horror films, both male and female viewers are, by the design of the film, made to direct their focus on the final girl. This grabbing of the audience's gaze, which is commonly reserved for males, makes the final girl the central character that the audience identifies with throughout much of the movie. And this seems to add weight to the argument of the empowerment of the final girl. However, just like any theory, this concept of the final girl has not gone without its criticism. Though the final girl portrays an active fighting female, other not-so-optimistic patterns have been noted in analyzing these apparently empowering characters. Kaesner draws attention to the fact that the final girl in horror films is most often portrayed as pure and virginal. In essence, she is a good girl. This calls into question what message it sends to the audience if it is only such good girls that survive to the end of these films. Again, it seems like the best strategy to survive a psycho murderer killing spree is to just hold out till marriage. The argument of the final girl as an empowered image of women is also criticized on the basis that this empowerment is often deflated at the end of the movie. It is often the case that the ultimate survival of many of these final girls only comes about by being rescued by another, stronger, usually male character. though Clover argues that this focus on the final hero in the films misses the point of the quality of the final girl's fight and her ability to survive. And of course, there are exceptions to this male rescuer pattern as well. Again, Alien serves to go against the grain by showing us a woman who is capable of saving herself without the help of a male character. Because of vastly differing viewpoints, no definitive consensus has been reached about exactly how much the empowerment of the final girl counterbalances the classically perceived portrayal of women in horror films.
So what do you think?
We've presented you today with an overview of women's representation in horror films. With our critical eye, we've looked at an example of horror's roots to reveal its not-so-flattering beginnings. We've also shown you the typical criticisms of the genre relating to gendered active versus passive roles and female victimization. And finally, to round out this topic, we presented you with the concept of the final girl and both its support and criticism. Taking all this into account, the rest is just up to you. It's your call what you choose to believe about the place of women in this genre. Obviously, though there are common forms of analysis, there isn't one definitive point of view. However, we hope we've given you some food for thought for the next time you curl up on the couch or in the theater to see the next box office chiller. And please, don't forget to pass the popcorn. You never know who might be sitting next to you.